The relative value of different cultural capital and norms of costume, behavior, and beliefs depend largely on a person's position in society, their status. When people understand you as an accountant, they will expect you to play very different roles than if they understand your status as a waiter. Status labels, with the role behaviors associated with them, are social constructions. There is no more practical reason to wear a tie for an accountant than a waiter, and yet the Thomas theorem states that if we value a tie as more professional, then more professional statuses will require one. Expected norms also change depending on the situation, as when you're out with friends, you're not in your professional role. But of course, those are just job positions, one of many statuses an individual has in their status set. Other statuses can master a person's life and opportunities. The roles associated with men and women in our culture are traditionally seen as so different that a famous book once said, "Men are from Mars and women are from Venus." And sociobiologists would argue that some of these differences are based on genetics and biology. After all, females and males do have slightly different DNA and clear anatomical differences. So is gender merely a matter of nature, or does society's nurture play a role? Most people are identified at or before birth by their genitalia as male or female, although for some those primary sex characteristics aren't as obvious, and it is often doctors that decide the status of intersex babies. But at puberty, secondary sex characteristics generally make biological sex more obvious. Not every adult male has more facial hair than every female, and not all females have bigger breasts than all males. Yet these traits are common enough to become expected and are more distinct than biological racial stereotypes. Yet many of the stereotypes of men and women are social constructions. It is our culture that labels young males and females boys and girls, and adults men and women, and that is our status, our gender. The particular status label and social roles associated with biological sex vary between different cultures. Don't tell any of these male warriors from all over the world and history that they are lesser men for wearing skirts. And many cultures recognize more than two possible gender statuses, such as the Hijra of India and Bangladesh, or the Muxes of Mexico. And some countries are beginning to allow for official sex status to remain unspecified or other. Yet there are some similar role expectations in many societies for the two most common genders. Men's values and even skills often have what's called an instrumental orientation, focusing on competition and technical thinking, while women may have an expressive orientation, focused more on cooperation and emotional concerns. These form some of the basis of our culture's ideas of masculine and feminine. Does female or male biology cause these differing traits, or is there something else in our history behind this correlation? Sociobiology points out that females alone are capable of giving birth, and in pre-industrial societies, there were few reliable options for birth control and bottle feeding. So our anatomy led to women spending more time around the home with children, while males, being slightly larger on average, could go farther from home to hunt and do battle. Functionalists would say that those basic adaptations for survival led most societies to construct separate statuses with different norms of behavior. But over time, these became expected traditions, and those norms became more formally sanctioned as not just what often happens, but what has to happen. Yet our culture's gender norms have changed greatly in the last 100 years. Diffusion of norms from other cultures open up more possibilities for both genders. Innovations like birth control and milk formula free women from reproductive constraints, which allows new discoveries of how capable both sexes can be in each other's traditional gender roles. Yet still, many people have traditional ideas of what is appropriate for each gender, and my students have consistently felt culture shock when they see cultures like the Wodaabe deviating from our own culture's norms. And changes in our own culture aren't universal, so culture lag has led some to internal culture shock. Conflict theory points out that the dominant majority in our society is cisgender, meaning their biological sex at birth matches their own gender identity, and heterosexual, meaning that they are attracted to members of the other sex. So those who challenge their power to set norms may face opposition, either with informal sanctions in the streets or through formal institutions such as the government. While increasing numbers of our society are trying to use cultural relativism to understand gender role deviance, many others find members of their own culture the most difficult to understand. In the last lesson, we saw how sometimes a person is labeled as a particular race or ethnic group because of the way they look, although they do not personally identify themselves as part of that group, or with the stereotypes associated with it. Similarly, gender identity and role behaviors vary greatly, and our culture has begun to reflect that. Those born female who feel they fit society's roles as a woman we call cisgender women, or in the opposite case, cisgender men. Those who do not feel their biological sex at birth matches their own gender identity may consider themselves transgender. But there are many more subtle ways that people exist between the extremes of cultural gender status roles, including clothing choice, interests, who you're attracted to, your feelings towards children, and others beyond count. In the next lesson, we'll look at how we come to understand our social status, develop our own identity, and learn the cultural roles to which we may or may not eventually conform.